Exactly 21 days since Nancy Guthrie vanished. The local police search grid is completely empty today. The news cameras packed up their equipment last week, but the federal government is just getting started. As of April 17th, the FBI Behavioral Analysis Unit took complete control of all digital and physical evidence. Local enforcement sources allege the FBI issued a strict stand-down order to county investigators. All public search warrants are frozen indefinitely. The physical ground search has been effectively shut down by federal authority. This systemic halt is not a sign of a cold investigation. It is the exact signature of a tactical delay. The authorities reportedly have a prime suspect under continuous covert surveillance right now. They know exactly where this individual sleeps and where they travel. Yet they refuse to execute an arrest warrant. We are looking at a deliberate administrative blockade. The question is no longer about finding a suspect in the dark. The question is why federal agents are protecting the integrity of a future indictment over an immediate county arrest. They have a name and they have the location, but the federal judicial machine prioritizes an airtight prosecution over public satisfaction. Welcome to Evidence with John, where we analyze the cold reality of criminal procedure. If you want to understand how the justice system actually operates before a trial even begins, you should subscribe to the channel right now. The procedural maneuvers in this specific investigation reveal a massive disparity between local urgency and federal patience. County police operate on probable cause to get a dangerous person off the streets quickly. The federal government operates on a timeline designed to secure a conviction beyond a reasonable doubt. A premature arrest automatically triggers the speedy trial clock under the Sixth Amendment. That legal clock forces prosecutors to present their case before complex digital forensics are fully processed. The stand-down order indicates the federal prosecutors know their surface-level evidence is legally vulnerable. They need undeniable digital confirmation to avoid a catastrophic double jeopardy scenario. A suspect acquitted because of rushed local police work can never be tried again for the exact same crime. The Bureau is carefully building an invisible digital fence while the prime suspect believes they are entirely free. We need to look at the exact timeline of the physical investigation to understand why the FBI abandoned the ground search entirely. The physical timeline establishes a clear pattern of rapidly degraded evidence. Nancy Guthrie vanished into severe weather conditions that systematically destroyed the primary crime scene. Her last known action was a phone call placed precisely at 1800 hours. That audio recording contained heavy static interference and distinct background anomalies. The initial county response focused almost entirely on the weather as the primary destructive factor. They arrested a local man named Brian Hooker based on early circumstantial connections. Hooker was processed into county holding and subsequently released back into the public. He remains an alleged person of interest, but his quick release signals a severe lack of actionable physical evidence. The storm essentially washed away the forensic material required to hold him without bail. Local authorities exhausted their standard investigative toolkit within the first 14 days of the disappearance. They dug through the mud and interviewed the immediate social circle. They found absolutely nothing that could survive a preliminary hearing in a county courtroom. The rapid degradation of the physical scene forced the investigation to pivot toward immutable electronic data. The weather can destroy tire tracks and footprints, but it cannot erase cellular telemetry or server logs. The static on the 1800 hours phone call is currently undergoing advanced federal audio filtration. That specific recording is no longer just a minor piece of the timeline. It is the absolute foundation of the federal takeover. The transition from county mud to federal data servers changes the entire trajectory of the prosecution. The FBI is not looking for a physical body in the woods anymore. They are looking for a verified digital footprint that completely contradicts the alibi of the primary suspect. The transition from environmental searches to digital surveillance requires a completely different investigative methodology. Local enforcement relies on immediate environmental clues to establish a basic perimeter. Federal investigators operate on a macro level using historical telecommunications data and geofencing technology. The severe weather event effectively sanitized the physical ground within hours of the disappearance. A forensic examination of the terrain yielded insufficient data to secure a grand jury indictment. The federal strategy completely ignores the mud and focuses entirely on the invisible electronic grid. Every mobile device constantly pings localized cellular towers to maintain a basic network connection. The Bureau is currently analyzing the aggregated telematics data from a 5-mile radius surrounding the final known coordinate. This specific data extraction allows analysts to isolate every device present during the critical timeline. The county police simply lack the advanced decryption software necessary to process this raw information. The necessity for federal intervention became absolute during the forensic isolation of the final phone call. The original audio file was heavily corrupted by atmospheric interference and wind distortion. The Behavioral Analysis Unit transferred this file to a specialized acoustic laboratory for frequency separation. Advanced audio filtration algorithms systematically remove the environmental static to isolate human vocal ranges. The initial local assessment categorized the background noise as purely environmental interference. The federal acoustic analysis reportedly identified a distinct secondary voice operating on a different frequency layer. The presence of an unidentified secondary vocal pattern fundamentally alters the classification of the incident. It transitions the event from an isolated weather emergency to a multi-subject investigation. This acoustic anomaly provides the definitive evidence that an unknown individual was present during the final transmission. The local authorities arrested their initial suspect based on proximity and historical association. The federal laboratory parameters require digital intersection to prove physical proximity beyond a reasonable doubt. The cellular data belonging to the initial person of interest did not intersect with the final coordinates. The local department was forced to release him when the digital footprint contradicted their localized theory. The federal approach dismisses circumstantial proximity and demands absolute technological verification. The analysis of historical data naturally progresses into the realm of active real-time monitoring. The identification of a secondary voice necessitates the immediate identification of the speaker. The most significant development involves the reported authorization of a Title III federal wiretap. Federal court dockets indicate a sealed warrant was approved shortly after the specialized unit assumed jurisdiction. A Title III authorization is the most intrusive surveillance instrument available within the federal justice system. A federal magistrate must review overwhelming probable cause before signing a document that strips a citizen of all communication privacy. The investigators must legally demonstrate that all standard investigative procedures have failed or are too dangerous to execute. The approval of this specific warrant means federal agents are actively intercepting live communications. They are currently monitoring phone calls, reading encrypted text messages, and tracking real-time location data. The surveillance target is operating under the false assumption of complete privacy. The execution of a federal wiretap requires a dedicated listening room monitored by specialized agents around the clock. The acquisition of this warrant creates a massive procedural paradox regarding the prime suspect. To secure the authorization, the prosecution must present enough evidence to convince a judge that a crime has occurred. If the prosecution possesses enough digital evidence to secure a federal wiretap, they logically possess enough evidence to secure an arrest warrant. To truly comprehend the strategic depth of federal prosecutions, you must follow the procedural breadcrumbs we analyze on this channel by subscribing. The federal judicial machine operates with calculated precision rather than immediate reaction. They are allowing the suspected individual to continue regular daily activities while recording every interaction. The tactical delay is designed to capture a post-incident confession or to map an extended criminal network. The investigators are waiting for the target to make a critical communication error while under federal observation. The decision to observe rather than detain prioritizes the ultimate conviction over immediate public safety. The central question remains heavily focused on the ultimate threshold for intervention. If federal agents are actively listening to every word spoken by the prime suspect, why do they allow that individual to remain free in the community? Sometimes the most critical piece of evidence is the one law enforcement must intentionally ignore. The federal authorities possess the isolated audio file and the Title III wiretap authorization. They possess enough intelligence to secure a county holding cell immediately, yet the prime suspect is allegedly living a completely normal life right now. They purchase groceries and maintain their standard daily routines. Federal agents are reportedly maintaining a continuous covert surveillance grid around this individual. The local police had to suppress their fundamental instinct to initiate an immediate arrest. Every physical movement the suspect makes is systematically recorded and analyzed by the behavioral unit. The federal prosecution strategy relies entirely on psychological pressure without any physical confrontation. The suspect is operating under the assumption that the severe weather destroyed all evidence. The surveillance team is patiently waiting for a singular critical communication error. They are waiting for the suspect to contact the unidentified secondary voice from the recording. The physical distance between the surveillance target and the federal agents is practically zero, yet the legal distance required to secure a conviction remains massive. This deliberate tactical delay creates an agonizing situation for the local community. The public observes an alleged criminal walking the streets without any visible police intervention. They do not perceive the invisible federal perimeter established around the target. The mathematical risk factor in this waiting game is absolutely astronomical for the authorities. The federal agents are gambling. They can maintain perfect surveillance without triggering target detection. If the suspect realizes they are being actively monitored, the entire operation collapses instantly. A panicked target might systematically destroy the final pieces of encrypted electronic evidence. They might attempt to flee the federal jurisdiction entirely before the indictment is sealed. The administrative decision to wait prioritizes a guaranteed future conviction over present physical containment. The behavioral analysis unit calculates the suspect will eventually feel secure enough to communicate freely. That manufactured false sense of security is the primary weapon the FBI is currently deploying. The catastrophic risk lies entirely in the mathematical possibility of losing visual contact. The media landscape is actively fighting this complex federal strategy every single day. The absolute silence from the authorities has generated severe and sustained public outrage. The daily press conferences have stopped completely without any official explanation. The published statements are intentionally vague and lacking any actionable investigative updates. This deliberate information vacuum is a calculated and necessary component of the ongoing investigation. The local community naturally interprets the administrative silence as investigative incompetence. The cold reality is that the public silence acts as a sophisticated legal shield. The central question of why the arrest has not happened consumes every other inquiry. The answer resides in the terrifying permanence of the American judicial system. The Fifth Amendment explicitly contains the double jeopardy constitutional clause. This fundamental protection guarantees that an individual cannot face prosecution twice for the identical crime. If the federal prosecutors authorize an arrest today, they must trial their current evidence. If a defense attorney successfully invalidates that corrupted audio file, the suspect walks free permanently. The government strictly receives one opportunity to present this complex case to a federal jury. A jury requires absolute scientific certainty before permanently revoking human freedom. They will not convict a citizen based on circumstantial proximity or unexplained digital anomalies. They require an airtight narrative supported by flawless and undeniable forensic science. If you appreciate analyzing the harsh realities of trial preparation, you should subscribe to this channel. We dissect the invisible legal barriers that frequently prevent immediate public justice. The public forcefully demands an arrest, but the prosecutors systematically demand a conviction. The intense friction between these two opposing goals defines the current state of the investigation. The media outrage actually serves the federal strategy by projecting an image of total failure. The suspect consumes the local news and genuinely believes the authorities have abandoned the search. That fabricated failure provides the exact psychological environment required to capture an unforced error. The invisible federal clock is ticking silently while the public clock demands immediate resolution. The ultimate breaking point is approaching rapidly as the Digital Forensics Laboratory concludes their analysis. The threshold for a federal conviction requires the total elimination of alternative theories. The Behavioral Analysis Unit operates under the strict mandate of proving guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. The current circumstantial evidence allows the defense to construct a narrative of unfortunate coincidence. The prosecution must obliterate that narrative before they ever step into a federal courtroom. The strongest working hypothesis revolves entirely around the unidentified secondary voice from the audio file. Federal investigators rarely deploy a Title III wiretap to simply monitor a primary suspect in isolation. They utilize these intrusive warrants to map the communication network between multiple involved parties. The secondary voice represents a massive structural vulnerability in the suspect's protective timeline. That unknown individual holds the exact contextual information required to secure a permanent federal indictment. The Tactical delay provides the necessary psychological environment to pressure this specific accomplice into cooperating. The federal prosecution strategy frequently involves offering absolute immunity to the first individual who provides actionable intelligence. The wiretap serves to monitor the deteriorating relationship between the primary target and this vulnerable accomplice. The silence from the authorities is designed to amplify the internal paranoia between these two individuals. They are both waiting for the other person to contact the federal authorities and negotiate a deal. The first person to sign a federal proffer agreement secures their freedom while burying their partner. The investigators are simply waiting for the psychological tension to break that specific partnership. The alternative to this waiting game is a rushed arrest that historically ends in absolute legal disaster. We must examine the catastrophic failure of premature arrest to understand the current federal patience. When local departments arrest a suspect based strictly on proximity, they activate the speedy trial provisions. The prosecution is then forced to present unfinished digital forensics to a skeptical civilian jury. Defense attorneys routinely dismantle incomplete digital evidence by introducing the concept of technological margin of error. If the defense successfully introduces reasonable doubt regarding the cellular data, the jury must legally acquit. An acquittal under these specific circumstances permanently shields the suspect from any future prosecution for this incident. The federal government watched local police arrest and release Brian Hooker based on incomplete environmental assumptions. The Bureau will not replicate that critical error by moving before the digital forensic matrix is completely finalized. The extraction of encrypted messaging data from seized localized cellular towers requires massive computational resources. The laboratory technicians must bypass sophisticated end-to-end encryption protocols without violating constitutional search parameters. This highly technical decryption process cannot be accelerated without jeopardizing the legal admissibility of the extracted data. The defense will fiercely challenge the specific methodology used to isolate the secondary voice on the recording. The prosecution must possess peer-reviewed acoustic analysis confirming the identity of that secondary speaker perfectly. They must link that acoustic profile to the intercepted communications obtained through the active federal wiretap. Every single data point must interlock perfectly to remove the possibility of reasonable doubt from the jury. The sheer volume of this electronic data requires months of systematic processing by specialized federal technicians. The public demands an immediate arrest, but the legal system demands an indestructible chain of evidence. The current situation represents a high-stakes standoff between digital forensic processing and public outrage. The prime suspect remains under continuous federal observation while the laboratory processes the encrypted data packets. We are currently operating in a highly volatile legal purgatory where the target is both free and trapped. Physical investigation is completely dead, but the digital investigation is operating at maximum federal capacity. The behavioral unit is waiting for the decryption algorithms to break the final communication barriers. They are simultaneously waiting for the secondary suspect to crack under the psychological pressure of the wiretap. The resolution of this standoff will not arrive through a dramatic physical confrontation in the woods. It will arrive silently through a sealed indictment filed in a federal district courthouse. You must monitor two specific legal indicators to predict the exact moment the arrest warrant drops. The first indicator involves a sudden influx of sealed filings on the federal judicial docket system. When prosecutors prepare to move, they file numerous sealed documents to prepare the preliminary hearing schedule. The second critical indicator involves the sudden and unexplained disappearance of secondary associates linked to the target. If an accomplice accepts a federal immunity deal, they are immediately removed from the active surveillance grid. Their sudden absence from the community signals that the prosecution has secured their star witness. The local police will not announce the arrest because they are no longer controlling the operational timeline. The FBI will execute the warrant simultaneously with the unsealing of the federal grand jury indictment. The suspect is currently living on borrowed time dictated entirely by the speed of federal decryption software. The severe weather destroyed the physical scene, but it merely delayed the inevitable digital reconstruction. The authorities know exactly who they are looking at, and they know exactly where they are right now. The invisible federal perimeter is slowly tightening around the target as the digital evidence solidifies into fact. The justice system is an incredibly slow machine, but it grinds forward with absolute and terrifying permanence. We will continue to track the federal dockets and analyze every procedural shift in this ongoing investigation. The American justice system is explicitly designed to resist public pressure and emotional demands for immediate action. It is meticulously built to be methodical and practically irreversible once the mechanism is formally set into motion. This specific ongoing investigation provides a perfect forensic case study regarding the immense legal gap between probable cause and reasonable doubt. Probable cause represents the absolute baseline legal standard required to execute a temporary arrest or secure a preliminary search warrant. It simply requires a logical and articulable belief that a crime was committed and the suspect is likely involved. The county police easily met that low threshold when they initially detained their first suspect based entirely on environmental proximity. However, the federal government operates almost exclusively on the much higher standard of proving guilt beyond a reasonable doubt to a jury. That supreme standard requires federal prosecutors to systematically eliminate every other logical explanation for the sequence of events. It demands an absolute mathematical certainty that permanently strips away the constitutional presumption of innocence from the defendant. If defense attorney can present a single plausible alternative theory regarding that secondary voice on the decrypted recording, the jury must acquit. The federal agents deployed to this case are not currently searching for more evidence to simply justify a basic arrest. They are deliberately constructing an indestructible digital cage that no defense attorney can possibly dismantle during a cross-examination. What this case teaches us about the modern legal framework is the vital importance of strategic patience over immediate community satisfaction. A rushed prosecution based on circumstantial weather anomalies and incomplete acoustic data almost guarantees a permanent acquittal under double jeopardy constitutional protections. The Behavioral Analysis Unit understands that physically capturing the suspect today is entirely meaningless if the final conviction fails in federal court next year. They are utilizing the active wiretap to transform circumstantial digital anomalies into direct and undeniable admissions of guilt from the target. The prolonged public silence from the authorities is simply the necessary price for guaranteeing the alleged perpetrator never walks out of a federal penitentiary. This specific methodological approach is exactly what separates temporary county holding cells from permanent federal prison sentences. The psychological patience required to continuously observe a dangerous suspect without intervening is the hardest discipline within modern law enforcement. That specific operational discipline brings us back to the central procedural paradox of this entire ongoing investigation. The authorities already possess the target name and the supporting digital telemetry, but they intentionally refuse to execute the warrant today. The local community observes a completely stalled physical search while the federal government quietly executes a highly sophisticated psychological operation. We are currently witnessing a massive high-stakes war of attrition between encrypted digital server logs and degrading human paranoia. I will personally monitor the federal judicial dockets every single morning for any newly sealed indictments directly related to this specific investigation. When this tactical delay finally ends and the federal authorities formally remove their information blockade, you will be the first to know on this channel. Make sure you are subscribed with your notifications actively turned on so you do not miss that critical procedural update. The physical evidence in the woods literally washed away weeks ago, but the invisible digital trap is almost completely closed right now. The suspect is currently living their daily life under the dangerously false assumption that the extended police silence indicates permanent safety. But we know the identity of the alleged perpetrator. The federal agents monitoring the wiretaps absolutely know his exact identity. And perhaps the most terrifying psychological reality of this entire situation is that he likely knows the FBI is standing right outside his front door.